Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishnayos Megillah, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1. Today we're going to do two Mishnayos, Yud and Yud Aleph, 10 and 11. So we begin with an introduction. During the 40 years of traveling in the wilderness, offerings were brought at the Mishkan, right? As referred to in English as a tabernacle. When the people entered Eretz Yisrael, they erected the Mishkan in Gilgal, near Yericho, where it stood for 14 years, during which the land was conquered and divided. They then moved it to Shiloh, where they built it with walls of stone, and it remained in Shiloh for 369 years. In the time of Eli HaKohen, the Mishkan of Shiloh was destroyed by the Plishtim, and it was rebuilt in Nov. After King Shaul killed the Kohanim of Nov, helping David, the Mishkan was moved to Givon. It stood in Nov and Givon for a total of 57 years. King Solomon Shlomo HaMelech then built the Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. So this is a very important, timeline that we need to keep in mind for these next two Mishnayos. Now, when there was a Mishkan in the wilderness and in Shiloh, and after the Beis HaMikdash was built, it was forbidden for a person to build his own altar and bring offerings on it. But when the Mishkan stood in Gilgal, Nov, and Givon, private altars were permitted. Thus, in those times, there were two types of altar, or a bama. Bama is when we refer to an altar, at least in the Mishnayos, and we refer to these situations, we call it a bama. There was a bama katana, a minor bama, which is the one that is built by a private person, and bama gadola, the major bama, which was the main communal bama altar in Gilgal, Nov, and Givon. These are the two things that we're going to be contrasting right now. A bama katana and a bama gadola. We're not talking about Yerushalayim. We're not talking about Shiloh. We're talking about we're talking about a bama katana, private bama, private mizbeach, and the mizbeach, which was the communal mizbeach, when the Mishkan was in Gilgal, Nov, and Givon. So the Mishnah reads, Ein bein bama gadol bama katana ela psachim. The only difference between the major bama and the minor bama is psachim, the Korban Pesach, which means a Korban Pesach could not be brought on a bama katana. When it came time to bring the Korban Pesach, you could not do it in your backyard, in your own private altar. You had to bring it to the bama gadola in, again, where the Mishkan was at that time. Now, when the Mishnah says that the bama, the difference between the two is psachim, it's more than psachim. And the way it's explained here in the notes is the following. Although the Mishnah mentions only the Pesach offering, the same law applied to any obligatory offering, private or public, that must be brought at a specific time. All such offerings are similar to the Korban Pesach, which had to be offered on the 14th of Nisan. This category includes the Tamid, the burnt offering, the communal burnt offering brought twice a day, and the Musaf offerings brought on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Yom Tovim. These two were offered at the major bama in Gilgal, Nov, and Givon. Okay? So you got the Psachim, you've got the Tamidin, you've got the Musafin. All those were at the bama Gadola, not at bama Katana. Now, however, obligatory offerings that have no fixed time, such as a chatas, a sin offering, were not brought anywhere. We're not brought even there. That's what that's the Torah speaks out. You've got so basically the way it boils down is like this, and this is the summary they have here. Voluntary offerings were brought at a bama katana, at the minor bama. You have something that you donated, which is really what we're going to read in the next part of the Mishnah. The next part of the Mishnah reads, okay, Za'aklal. This is the rule. Kol shu nidav nidav. Anything that is basically voluntary. And we know there's two ways of having a voluntary carbon. It could be a neder, where you say, Harei alai oila, take upon myself to bring a carbon. Or it is nidav, when you actually designate a specific animal for a carbon. So, but again, they're both voluntary. So in any voluntary carbon, karib bama. is offered on a bama, which really here means a bama katana, the minor bama. And anything that is not, again, voluntarily brought, Eina karba bama, is not brought on a minor bama. So the Mishnah tells us a rule about the voluntary ones. The voluntary ones can be brought on a bama, and anything that is not voluntary cannot be brought on a bama. Now, when you talk about anything that's not voluntary, it means obligatory. But there's two types of obligatory. There's obligatory like the Korban Pesach, which is a obligatory sacrifice that has a specific time when it has to be brought. And the same thing applies as a Korban Pesach, that's a Korban Tamid, that's a Korban Musaf. These are obligatory, and they have a set time. So will they be brought on the private bama? Bama Katana? Absolutely not. Will they be brought on the Bama Gedola, on the major one, the communal one, in Nov, Givon, and in Gilgal? The answer is yes. But we still have a set of karbanas that are obligatory but don't have a set time, such as a Korban Chatas, a sin offering. That has nowhere to be brought. That has nowhere to be brought. That's what it's saying here. They're not. It's not even brought in Givon, no, in Gilgal, Nov, and Givon. And during those times, you couldn't bring a Korban Chatas. There was no way to bring it. You couldn't bring it by a private one. You can't even bring it by the Bama Gedola. That's the din. That's what it says. Obligatory offerings that do not have a fixed time could not be brought anywhere. That was the situation. Okay, that's Mishnah Yud. Mishnah Yud Aleph. Ein ben Shiloh to Yerushalayim. Now we're going to discuss the difference between Shiloh and Yerushalayim. Shiloh was where the Mishkan was. Okay, Mishkan Shiloh, that was where it was during the times of it was destroyed by the Plishtim in the times of Eli, and that's Mishkan Shiloh, where it was 369 years. Then you have Yerushalayim, means the Beis Hamikdash. So there's no difference. There's no difference between Shiloh and Yerushalayim, between the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan and Shiloh. In Shiloh, you could eat what they call kachim kalim, offerings of a lesser sanctity, and Meiser Sheni, anywhere you can see Shiloh from. Any area that you could see Shiloh from, you could eat kachim kalim and Meiser Sheni. Yerushalayim, but once you had the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, lifnim and achayma, they had to be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim. It didn't make a difference if you could see Yerushalayim from somewhere. They had to be in the walls of Yerushalayim. So as we know, offerings belong, I'm going to read here for the notes, offerings belong to one of two groups, kachim kachim, which they translate as offerings of greater sanctity, and kachim kalim, offerings of lesser sanctity. Kachim kalim must be eaten inside the kachim, which we're going to read very soon, had to be eaten within the courtyard within the courtyard. Kachim kalim can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. Kachim refers to, including kachim, are a chatas, an asham, an oila, and a mincha. Sin offering, guilt offering, burnt offering, and a meal offering. Kachim kalim include a korban shlamim, peace offering, bachar, firstborn, meiser behema, tithing of the animal, and pesach, the korban pesach. So those are just the explanation behind the terms kachim and kachim kalim, which we didn't do yet, the kachim part at the end of the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah the part that we just read was that kachim kalim, as we just explained, the ones of lesser sanctity, a shlamim, a bachar, that's kachim kalim. Ma'aser sheni is that after your new grain, you give a separation to the Kohen, then you give from the rest of that a tenth of the Levi, and then what's left of that is Ma'aser sheni, the second Ma'aser. The second Ma'aser is sanctified. You got to eat in Yerushalayim, or you're giving onto money that you take the money to Yerushalayim and spend in Yerushalayim. The point is here, the Ma'aser sheni has to be eaten within. It has to be eaten within the area of the call it the city or the area of where the Mishkan of the Beis Hamikdash was. So where the Mishkan was in Shiloh, you could eat it b'chol haraya. You could eat it wherever you saw Shiloh from. Yerushalayim, but once in Yerushalayim, the Beis Hamikdash, it has to be within the wall. Kan v'kan, in both cases, meaning whether we're talking about Shiloi or the Beis Hamikdash, kache kachim na'achalim lefnim akloyim. The kache kachim, the karbanis that fall under the category of kache kachim, of the higher level of sanctity, like the chatas, like the asham, have to be eaten within the curtains. Within the curtains is another way of saying in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. By the Mishkan, we know the Mishkan courtyard was surrounded by curtains. That's in the desert, or even before they went ahead and no, the Mishkan, the chutzner of the Mishkan was surrounded by curtains. The chutzner of the Beis Hamikdash was surrounded by a wall. So the point here is that kache kachim have to be eaten within the courtyard. We refer to the courtyard as within the curtains because the courtyard of the Mishkan was surrounded by the curtains. But the point is that kache kachim have to be eaten within the courtyard of either the Mishkan and Shiloi or the Beis Hamikdash Yerushalayim. And then the Mishnah says, Kedusha Shiloi yesh acharei heter. The sanctity of Shiloi has after it a permissibility. Kedusha Yerushalayim ein acharei heter. And the sanctity of Yerushalayim after it has no permissibility. This is referring to the idea that after Shiloi was destroyed, you were allowed to have a bama. You're allowed to have a personal altar. But after Yerushalayim was destroyed, after Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it didn't become permissible to have private altars. So that's what it means. After the Mishkan was destroyed, bamais, meaning these private altars, became permitted again. Because remember, in Gilgal, when it was still in Gilgal, it was permitted. Once it came to Shiloi, the private altars were not permitted. Once Shiloh was destroyed, the private altars, even though you had a Mishkan in Givoin and Noiv, nonetheless, the private altars were still permitted. By Yerushalayim, once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there was the heter of the permissibility of having a private altar did not return. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Just remind everyone there will not be a Mishna live stream tomorrow morning.
I got a question. Has nothing to do